Another method to look at for constraints is the takt time, which is the ratio of total time available to meet the expected customer demand. So in this example, we have an employee break time. So our manufacturing plant operation has 400 minutes of manufacturing time available per day. If average customer demand is 800 units, the takt time is 30 seconds per unit. So that takt time of 30 seconds is used to help us balance the flow of the product through the processes. We would also look at adding capacity to the constraint. So hiring additional people, adding an extra machine, those are long-term things we can do to improve flows through those constraints, depending on what those constraints are. Then step 5 would be to redesign the manufacturing processes for flexibility and fast cycle time. There are multiple ways to organize a manufacturing floor, and some of them have proved to be more productive than others. So this is where we would look at moving, maybe switching from a line production to a cell production. And this varies based on our production and how we want to set up our operations. So we're looking at these 5 steps in an example of the Burberry Group, which is a fashion agency. So we have our 5 steps in strategic decision making that we looked at in chapter 1. So first, what are our strategic issues? Well, we compete on design and innovation in the fashion industry. What we're looking at is, should we focus on one over the other, or should we focus on design, or should we focus on improving our operations to meet our customer demands and expectations? We want to make sure that when we're doing this, this kind of reconstruction, that we're not losing customers, that we're not doing things that would upset our customers and cause any loss of customers. So the book talks about how this is a fashion retailer with several hundred stores worldwide. So the CEO believes we're currently making way too many things. There are too many product lines, and the complexity of the large number of products results in a lot of delays through the value chain. So our options are to look at our design so we can decrease our product line and look at different options, or we can improve our operations to become more efficient. So we're going to look at the 2 different options, collect information about them, look at different ways that we can alternatively implement this, and what this group decides to do is to simplify our product line and to focus on more efficient and less costly operations. So they're going to reduce the amount of things that are produced and really focus on just their main brand. They're going to reduce the number of products by 1/3. And then the 5th step, remember, is to provide an ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness and implementation in step 4. So does reducing their product line by 1/3 and focusing on a more streamlined product line process, does that help them continue their competitive edge in design and innovation? Is that helping to streamline their processes through the operations? And has it been effective in making the change that they're going to do? If not, then they would go back to obtaining information and looking at alternative actions and start the process over. Okay. This, we're looking at the differences between theory of constraints and activity-based costing. So in theory of constraints, we're looking at a short-term focus. So we're just looking at what the throughput margin analysis is based on our current constraints and how we can utilize the highest amount per constraint. We're mainly looking at it to optimize our production flow and our short-term product mix. It's not a long-term solution to a problem, though. Activity-based costing is a long-term focus because this analyzes all of our product costs and activities and helps us develop an understanding of the cost drivers at all levels. We're looking at it for strategic pricing and profit planning. So they're both very useful. Theory constraints is very short-term approach, but if we're seeing resource constraints and we're utilizing theory of constraints, we want to look at the long-term picture. We would move into looking at how we're actually costing and what our activities are. We're going to talk about the differences between committed versus incurred costs throughout the life cycle costing. So some products have a much longer life cycle than others. And at what time do we commit the costs versus when the costs are actually incurred? And we see that the percent of total costs, and we talked about this in a much earlier slide in the last video, that many of the costs happen during research and development and design. Our life cycle costing looks at a more complete perspective of product cost and profitability than just pricing based on manufacturing costs alone. So a lot of the product costs that we've been looking at throughout this textbook and semester have been focused on what are the manufacturing production costs. However, we know that research and development and design can account for a significant portion of the total life cycle cost. And so if we're trying to recover all of the costs for a product as part of the selling, we want to look at that full cost of the life cycle. So we get into our pricing decisions. For pricing decisions, we need the entire cost of the life cycle and information about the sales life cycle. We have 4 different ways that we can look at costing. Okay? We have full cost plus markup, life cycle cost plus markup, full cost and desired gross margin percent, and full cost plus desired return on assets. So on the next slide, we see the calculations for all of those. So full manufacturing cost plus markup is the cost times 1 plus our markup. So if we say we have a 25% markup or a 30% markup. Life cycle cost is those total life cycle costs then times 1 plus the markup. If we're going for desired gross margin percent, so we say we want our gross margin to be 25% or we want our gross margin to be 10%. Then we're going to divide the full manufacturing cost by 1 minus the desired gross margin percentage. If we're looking at a full cost plus desired return on assets, then we want to look at our desired profit before tax profit divided by our life cycle cost of expected sales. We then take that life cycle cost times our markup rate that we calculated in the previous step. If we're strategic pricing based on where the position of the product or service in the sales life cycle. So remember in the sales life cycle, we have the introduction, then growth, then maturity, and then decline. So in introduction, our prices set at its highest level to help us recover those research and development and design costs and to take advantage of any new product demand. During the growth phase, our pricing is likely to stay relatively constant as we work to build profitability. So once we recover our costs, then we start generating a profit. At maturity and decline, our volume and prices start to reduce while we make attempts to reduce any of our life cycle cost for production. Peak load pricing is a type of pricing that capitalizes on consumer behavior. So different examples of peak load pricing would be, for example, how airlines and hotels increase their prices for spring break travel and holiday travel versus what they offer on other dates. So they know that more people want to travel during spring break, so they increase their prices during that time. It's called peak load pricing to take advantage of the supply versus demand issue. Another popular one for hotels would be like, think if you're in Iowa City or the University or Ames for season ticket holders of football games when we were able to go and watch football games. And we would have the hotels would be high in demand on football game weekends. So under peak load pricing, the hotels would charge more for rooms during football game weekends than they would on other weekends throughout the year. And that's one of the reasons that hotels charge more for Friday and Saturday rooms than they do for rooms Sunday through Thursday, because the demand is higher on the weekend than it is during the week.